Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, as usual, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. We have a special guest on today, somebody that I can happily say that I got a chance to coach while I was at William and Mary. Give him his well-deserved intro here right now. So, stellar career at William and Mary. I was going through statistics earlier today, and I think he's in the top 20 career at William and Mary in pretty much every significant offensive category, except for hit by pitches, which is owned by Ryan Lindenmuth by an extremely large amount. He slashed 330, 427, and 543 during his career. 25 taser beams, 56 doubles, 154 RBIs. He's a two-time first-team All-CAA performer. He was a semifinalist for the Dick Hauser Trophy, which is the College Baseball Player of the Year. That was for your sophomore year, I believe. Excuse me, your junior year. First-team All-Region, two-time CAA champ, two-time regional finalist in the NSCA State and UVA regional. He was a draft pick for the Oakland A's. He once had 11 RBIs in one game. I was on the bench for that. It was electric. He hit 388 with 13 bolts, 52 RBIs, and 15 doubles in 45 games as a junior. He's now the head of sports performance at UAC. He's been a featured writer in T Nation, Simply Faster, NSCA, Stack, Bodybuilding.com. And he's the creator of the Apex training team. And we are happy to have my man, Charley Gould, on the podcast today. How we doing?
Man, I appreciate that intro. I'll try to live up to it. Keith, it's nice to meet you via Zoom, and Coach K, it's always good to see you.
And wonderful to have you on. 11 RBIs in one game.
I did. Yep. Here's
two things that I have to get better at, Charley, just off the rip. One, I'm super impressed that you had 11 RBIs in one game. I usually intro people. My intros are horrific compared to what Andy just did. So I now have to step my game up when we interview the next people.
You had like the numbers down, the resume down.
That was awesome.
And
but seriously, we're happy to have you on. This is awesome. I'm super excited for this.
Yeah, I think you're going to give kids and listeners, parents, you're going to get a different perspective, a unique perspective and a valuable perspective, because you've been through a lot of the things that we talk about. You've lived the college life. You moved on. You played pro ball. And now you're in a space that's become increasingly important for kids as they continue to try to get along in their recruiting journey. So let's kick it off, man. I know, obviously, I coached you for 3 years and enjoyed every second of it. Your recruiting journey wasn't what people might think after I read off all those stats, right?
Right. Right.
You had a ton of success in college. Got a chance to play pro ball. A lot of people would just assume that you were sifting through offers and that it was a super easy path for you to get where you are or get where you ended up at William and Mary. But it really wasn't that way. So take some time, and I want the listeners to hear kind of what you experienced starting in high school and kind of how you ended up at William and Mary.
Right. Well, first things first, Coach, I've said this to you, but I just want to reiterate that out of all the coaches that I had, you were the best one I ever had. So I really appreciate you having me on here.
That means a lot.
So, all right, onto the practical stuff. So, yeah, there are a bunch of different, I guess, directions I could take this. So I grew up in Chicago, and I was a 3-sport athlete up until high school. And if I had to categorize myself as a player, I guess you could say I was good, not great, not a super great athlete, didn't get a ton of attention. Like pretty much everyone nowadays, I was on the travel ball team and played high school. And I would say up from freshman to sophomore year, I played on JV, didn't do anything special. Junior year, like most people, I played on a pretty good travel ball team out in Chicago, got some looks, and I actually hired someone similar to you to help me with the college recruiting process. And I was pretty focused on, I wanted a good academic school. So I got some attention from random schools that I wasn't super interested in. Of course, we reached out, we made a list, and didn't get a ton of attention. One thing, and I don't know if you know this, Coach K, so I pretty much went through the whole recruiting process, and I got, like I said, I got some attention here and there. I was actually planning to go to Harvard. That's where you could say, verbally committed. And I went on an official visit and everything there. But what they do is they have a likely letter, if you're familiar with that. So pretty much when they give you the likely letter, since the Ivy Leagues work differently and you can't get, a guaranteed black and white, a likely letter pretty much says, hey, we think you're going to get in. So I pretty much wrote off the end of the recruiting process. It was early fall of my senior year. And then late October came around. They're like, sorry, the likely letter didn't go through. And so at that point, I was sitting around. I was in winter of my senior year of high school when just about every guy's committed. And I had pretty much like a couple options. So one of them was, and I don't know if you know this either, I had a minimum scholarship offer from Villanova. And that was actually at the time what I wanted to do. The other option was to take a prep year. Interestingly enough, so my parents have always been super supportive of my baseball career. My dad pretty much said, I don't want you going to Villanova. And he wasn't the type of guy that would normally say something like that. And I kind of tried to plead with him a little bit. And he's like, because I know you're settling. So I was like, okay. And looking back, he was absolutely right. So I ended up doing a prep year out in New Hampshire at a school called Phillips Exeter Academy. And it was at that point, it was just one random showcase that I went to after that senior year. And I got seen by one of the coaches, William and Mary, did pretty well, ended up going out there for a showcase. And then I didn't even get a scholarship offer. So I got a preferred walk-on spot. So I guess if you had to distill it down, I wasn't a super highly recruited guy. I wasn't a huge scholarship guy. I was just kind of someone that went through I guess you could call it a tough journey, and then found a decent place that I wanted to go to.
Yeah. And I mean, it worked out pretty good, right? So you get to William and Mary and you walk into, like, your freshman year, you guys are really good, right? I had the luxury of walking into your sophomore year and coming into a program that had some really good players. Like, what was it like stepping onto campus there? And talk a little bit about some of the things you had to learn your freshman year, because I know that wasn't, your transition wasn't the easiest. To get to being like an everyday dude as a sophomore.
Right. So I would say it was interesting because I think I did some things right when I came in and obviously some things wrong. One thing that I think I did pretty well is I came in with the mindset of, I'm just going to try to show what I can do, because I knew showing up to you had good guys there, and anybody who's out going to play college baseball, they'll see chances are you're not going to show up and be the guy or one of the top guys. So I actually performed pretty well at the beginning. Obviously it was like a learning experience when you take that jump from casual high school player and then you're doing the morning workouts and balancing school and dealing with the older guys. And then, and I guess we can dive into that later, like the good of that and the bad of that and whatnot. But if you want me to fast forward to the major lesson my freshman year was I was starting, and Keith, I don't know if you know this, I started the first game of the season. We were at Clemson. It was a Friday night game, and I was DHing, and I flew out at the end of the game to end the game. I think we were down like 2-1, and I ended up taking my fist, throwing it down, punching the ground. And as soon as I got up and I shook it out a little bit, and I had broken my hand. And so our coach at the time, who was pretty hardcore, but rightly so, had me sitting out in the stands for the next 2 games. For the next couple months, I think I had to go to the treadmill and run for a couple miles instead of going to the full practice. But if I had to like pull a lesson out of that right off the bat, it was, number one, like a perspective shift. Like I don't have any special privileges here. I'm nothing special. And then number two was I got to observe. We were fortunate to have a lot of good older guys who went about things the right way and who were super bought in, who worked hard. And I was able to see what a lot of the older guys did. And one of the things that I took away from that was that the best guys, I would say at all levels. You see it in professional baseball and in college, and I'm sure at all levels of D1, D2, D3. But the best guys do have like a certain temperament about them in terms of staying even keeled, going about things the right way, and I would say of lessons that I learned my freshman year, that was a big one. And then I can go into the sophomore situation if you want to as well. I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
No, let it fly. Let's hear it.
So, okay, yeah. So, and Keith, I'm not sure how much you know this too. Long story short, I the freshman year taught me some things. As Coach K knows, I focused a little bit more on like my physical health and didn't just focus on being a meathead. Worked hard. I ended up going out to get some help from guys like Cressy. I went out there in the winter, and this was before you came, so I went out to a different hitting coach, and I came back and I did really well in the preseason, and for a few reasons related to older guys and positioning and defense, I didn't start playing at the beginning of the year, and I've kind of embraced the mindset, and this is something that I had learned the previous year watching these guys. Kind of embraced the mindset of I'm just going to try to focus on what I can do. Try to keep getting better myself and try to take advantage of what opportunities I can. And then we had, fortunately and unfortunately, a couple guys go down with injuries, and I got a shot and I did pretty well. And at that point, I kind of earned a spot that season. And then obviously I had some success and got the awards. And then at that point is, I guess, when you can say I was able to take off.
Yeah, I mean, when I walked in, I came in the middle of the season, and it was interesting because, Murph and, shout out to Murph and Case, like, love those guys to death. One of the big pieces of advice that I got from Murph, and me and him kind of talked about it and talked through it, is like, hey, like, take some time to get to know these guys. And it became pretty clear, and you had the same quality, but there was a lot of older guys on that team that were very diligent in what they did. And it was never pulling teeth to get anybody to work. The attention to detail and the preparation was really big. And I don't know if you learned that from guys like Ryan Lindemuth and
absolutely
Cole and Kevin Nutter was another guy, like Derek Lowe. Like, there was a professionalism about how those guys went about their business, and you had that quality. And I feel like that was something that you could hang your hat on every day, that your senior year, you're a guy who was a preseason All-American. You'd stacked up all the awards. You'd won a bunch. You didn't have any reason to be one of the more attentive guys if you didn't want to be. But I remember always, if me and you were in the cage, it was, you were dialed in. You were asking the right kind of questions. You were always doing things the right way. And sometimes when guys have success, they rest on it. And I think that's one of the things that I admired most about you from a coaching perspective, is that I knew exactly what I was going to get out of you every single day. And that level of consistency, I think, is a separator for a lot of kids. And like you kind of hit on it, like you learned from having a chance to observe some of those guys that sometimes the best thing you can do is just continue. Like, just continue doing what you're doing, continue trying to focus on helping the team. And yeah, I mean, you went from kind of being on the outside looking into a dude that we had to have in the lineup every single day. And I don't think that happens for a lot of guys if they don't have that kind of a mindset.
Well, I was fortunate, as you know, to have a lot of good older guys around me and good coaches. But I think it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg type thing. I think one of the reasons why I got better is because I developed the ability to really just focus on myself in terms of like getting better. What can I do? What can I control? And that stuck with me because I saw that that's what really gave me the success. And as cliche as it sounds, I think that inner, I'll call it search to constantly improve in pretty much every area is the main separator that I see. And it was a pretty similar thing in pro ball. The guys who are like seriously dedicated to their crafts and are finding every single angle they can to get better. It's pretty clear who does that and who doesn't.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I wanted to just touch on something real quick. I thought it was interesting for, the people who listen to this, and especially the younger kids, because we've all seen it as coaches. We all did it when we were younger. Like, you fly out and you break your hand, unfortunately. And then the subsequent stuff that comes, I think I know who was the head coach, but it kind of jives. Awesome dude, but it jives. But I think it's important to note, like, when you say that, like, the older guys and people you're around and some of the people at all levels that are really good, they have a certain, kind of, like, they're never too high, never too low. And I think that that's something that's super important if you want to play at a high level, because you have to understand that you're going to get out more times than you're going to be successful. And if you continually harp on, and draw the negative out of why you're getting out, like, you're going to continue to struggle more than you probably should. And I think that that's, it's an important, unfortunately, it's a lesson you had to learn the hard way, but I think that it's an important lesson for younger people listening to this. Like,
yeah, for sure.
You go to college and you're throwing your stuff and you're slamming bats and and look, I had guys do it when I was coaching. Like, eventually it just gets to the point where I turn around because I'm standing next to the bat rack and I'm like, yeah, it's not the bat's fault. It's not the helmet's fault. Like, I just watched you take two fastballs and then swinging a slider in the dirt. Like, we need to have a better approach or whatever it might be. Like, and I think sometimes this game is so results driven and we get so hung up on that stuff sometimes that, like, that's where a lot of that frustration creeps in. And then it can manifest itself in, hurting yourself. I mean, you're not the first guy, you're not the last guy that's going to do it. But I think that it's an important lesson for people to hear and kind of, like, digest a little bit of, like, hey, like, you can't get too high and too low in this game. And I learned it from Coach Rossi, who we had on here, and one of my mentors who coached for 54 years at Siena College. And he was huge on, like, you can't get too high, too low. Like, a 9-inning game is too long to try to maintain a super high energy. Not to say, like, you have the high motor guys,
right,
but the rah, like, everyone's fired up and ready to go. Like, this isn't football. Like, you don't get a 30-second break in between every play. Like, you're constantly in it. You're constantly thinking. And to try to maintain that over, a weekend of 27 innings and 56 games, like, it's too hard. And if you can just kind of maintain the level of being locked in and understanding that, hey, I might have to tweak some things here or there to find a little bit more success. Like, those people, I think, to your point of, like, having that demeanor, like, those guys tend to start finding more success earlier when they can see that stuff and learn those lessons a little bit earlier, because then as you get older, all of a sudden, like, the game slows down a lot quicker for you. And now, you're understanding pitch count, or you're understanding pitches in certain counts and what pitches are trying to do. And all of a sudden, like, the game starts to come a little bit easier for you. But, I just kind of wanted to touch on that because I thought that was an important thing that you talked about. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that it's super important for kids and parents, because I was going to say, it's a conversation I have with some of my baseball guys occasionally, because they'll see even someone like, the famous clip of David Ortiz, I think, smashing a helmet or smashing a phone with his bat. But even then, that's a guy from, what I gather, he'll go through that ordeal and then 10 seconds later, he'll be like, I'm good, Yeah. I mean, there are obviously different ways you can express it and deal with it or whatever it is. And nobody's perfect. But time and time again, it's something I observed in high-level players, and that served me very well. And of course, I was never perfect with it. I remember one time my senior year, slammed my helmet after a ground out, and Coach K yelling at me to stop feeling sorry for myself. And I looked at him and I'm like, you're right. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thing, because I think it's prevalent, obviously, at the lower levels in high school and younger, amateur baseball. And I remember when I first got into coaching, my roommate, when I first started at West Alabama, he played at Middle Tennessee. Really, really good player. Shout out Will Holsey. But his dad was like a legendary JUCO coach in Alabama. Like, and you want to talk about hard nosed? Like, I'm talking, like, if he thought you were soft, he put a pacifier in your locker and you had to, like, wear it at practice. Like that type of stuff. But I remember him and I, we had a random, it was Easter Sunday. And we went and watched Alabama LSU play in Tuscaloosa, because we lived 40 minutes from there. And it was so noticeable between the two teams. And Alabama really wasn't that great then, and LSU was obviously really good in the 2008. But, like, no one throws their stuff. Guys just walk back to the dugout, put their stuff down, move on to the next. And it was noticeable because it's like they know that they're going to get another 2-3 at bats, and we can't just harp on one thing. We got to turn the page to the next one. And I think, I don't know, like I'm spitballing here. Like I think sometimes when we talk about college baseball because we played it and Andy and I coached it and you're around it a lot, like how many at bats you're going to get over the course of a year, right? Like 1 or 2 at bats, not the end of the world. And I think sometimes at the lower levels, like, if you're only going to get 40 at bats, like I think some people get super frustrated when they're not finding success right away. And, to lose your cool and harp on the negative is never necessarily going to be the good thing for you moving forward. It's more, working through what it is. And this game's tough, man. Like, it's the greatest thing in the world, but it's tough. So like, the best in the world fails 7 out of 10 times or 6.5 out of 10 times. And people are like, that guy's good. I've said this before on here, like you knock down a 30 on your math test, like no one's going to be like, yo, Charlie, can you tune me? Right. Like, no, I got a 30, bro. Like, what am I going to do for you? You go out and hit 350 and people are like, hey, what are you doing to find out all of this success? And it's a weird thing. And I think especially for higher end academic people, for kids to work through that stuff, because you're always used to finding success in the vast majority of things you do.
And as I kind of condense everything I'm saying, one of the kind of cliche things that coaches say is to go about things the right way, and I kind of think about the things that helped me and the things that I saw the successful guys do, and the things that I try to instill in the athletes that I work with it's things like staying even keeled, treating what you do as business, constantly trying to improve. That stuff is the real separator. And I think it kind of all falls under the same umbrella.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about some of the pillars that we had at William and Mary, and this was stuff that was put in place before I was there. So I am by no means taking credit for it. It's stuff that I learned when I was there. Like one of the big things Murph used to preach is like, just keep playing. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gets to at the heart of what we're talking about is that you have a bad first at bat, or you have a first at bat that isn't successful, not necessarily a bad one. Like, just keep playing. And I think it was part of the reason we were good there, because we were able to have that mindset of you don't need to win the game in the first inning. Like, just keep playing. And we had older guys who held that up, and having guys like Lindy, who's probably the best leader I've ever been around in, the 20-ish years that I was around college baseball, or 15-ish years that I was either playing or coaching. Those guys, because he did it, everybody else did it. Right. And that leads me into the play hard stuff. And it was something you were really good at. But my question to you is, did you have to learn how to do that? Or was it something that the culture kind of brought out in you? Like, it was something you always did really well. And it was something a lot of our guys did well, but you always ran hard. You always practiced really well. Is that something you had to figure out? Or is that something that you kind of did regardless?
It was something that I had done, but I think it does take on a little bit of a different level when you see how it can help with your success and you see successful people doing it. I know I kind of keep beating that same horse, but if I had to pinpoint it down, it's and as cliche as it sounds, it's about constantly doing a little bit more of the small things, constantly pushing yourself a little bit harder. And again, I keep reiterating, and I'm fortunate that I had really good teammates and really good coaches. But for me, I think it was something that I had, but having a good environment and going through the things that I did and seeing what brought success, that kind of pulled it out of me and maximized it.
That makes
sense.
And
I've seen it. I've seen it with people in person. Like, you can flip that switch. There have been people who I've met that are seemingly lazy who turn it around when they have either a rock bottom moment or they get inspired by somebody else doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple guys that you played with that probably had that same exact transformation. One of the things I want to tease at here, because I'm kind of a nerd for it, and I know that you are too. You were obviously a really good hitter, right? You had a ton of success offensively. Now I saw all the behind the scenes stuff, right? And I saw how diligent you were, the amount of swings that you put in, the attention to detail you had to your swing, which I don't think that it doesn't go unsaid, but one of the things I'd like to pick your brain on, and I thought you were really good at this, and this is why I want to talk about it, is that you were awesome at being able to make adjustments. And I think it's one of the things that separates guys as they mature as a hitter is that you go from swinger to hitter. And kind of putting you on the spot here, but walk me through like how you used to manage at bats and certain things that you used to pay attention to as a hitter that allowed you to have an at bat where you're facing Taylor Clark in the first inning and he blows your freaking doors off, and then you smash a double off him your next at bat. And like some of the things that you paid attention to, and I say that specifically because that actually happened. For those of you who are listening, Taylor Clark's a big leaguer. But talk a little bit about that because, like I said, I'm a nerd for this stuff, and it's one thing that we haven't gotten into a ton on the podcast, and I'd love to hear your perspective on some of it.
So as you know, I loved to nerd out on the swing. You know, in my free time when I wasn't studying or when I should have been studying, I would be watching slow motion videos of, different swings, and I would be comparing it up with myself. So I was a super big nerd about the swing and hitting. As far as the approach goes, that was something that I constantly had to refine. And I mean, as you guys both know, there's definitely a big jump in college baseball because guys have better stuff. They don't make as many mistakes. You have to adjust your approach depending on who you're facing. For me, and this was kind of a trial and error and seeing what worked for me. If I'm going straight X's and O's, it was defining my approach. So for example, one of my things was I'm not going to get beat by a fastball. Right? That's what I would always think. No matter who I was facing, I would say I'm not going to get beat by a fastball because generally speaking, that's going to be the best pitch that you're going to hit. The other thing that I would do, and I'm going to bounce a little bit all over the place, is I was very, very diligent when I was in the on deck circle, watching what guys got and timing it up. And then, of course, you have to shift from at bat to bat and see how they attacked you. And then at the same time, not really trying to overthink things. So I had my approach, and again, that took some time to develop. And I think I did a pretty good job sticking with it. And of course, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to swing pitches in the dirt and whatnot. But I think for me and I'm sure guys have different approaches and different things that they feel comfortable doing. But as soon as I nailed that down, I think that gave me a lot of flexibility in how I adjusted. Because you say that, and I'm like, I didn't really adjust a ton of stuff, but it's just because I think I had my approach and I was able to be pretty religious with it.
Yeah. And it's funny. Like I go back on like that lineup was so good and everybody hit a little bit different, but I thought you were one of the guys that could get out on a pitch early in a game and you weren't going to get out on that pitch later in the game. And I thought that was something that was unique because I know you spent a lot of time with me in the dugout before you even got on deck, going over charts, looking at like, hey, what did if you had good examples in the lineup there, you were going to get pitched similar to like Michael and Nick Thompson, where you would ask me, hey, what have those guys seen in these counts? And that's something I don't think a lot of high school kids, and I think if you're a college kid listening to this, if you have this kind of information available to you, like you can narrow it down. Like if you're going to face a guy coming out of the bullpen and he can't glove strike a slider, like it's a non-factor. Or if you know that dude's a 60%, 70% slider guy, well, then maybe you have to adjust off that fastball and it's something that you're sitting on. I always thought you were really good at that. And I thought you were a guy who was always really dangerous against guys who had good stuff. Right? Like a lot of guys are good when they're like, you're getting guys who are like 88 and it's like average breaking ball and stuff like that. I thought you always performed really well with guys who had premium stuff. And I think it was your ability to, one, make sure you didn't get beat by velocity, but two, you were willing to make an adjustment. Like you weren't a stubborn hitter, I guess is the way I'm putting it.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, it's funny you say that because I don't think I was the best at this, but I guess I was pretty good at it is like being a student of the game. And, you watch enough baseball and you observe enough. I mean, there are so many chances to get experience when you're not playing. Watching every guy's at bat, seeing how they pitch to other guys, and then seeing how even your pitchers go against other hitters. It's like constantly taking in information. As you know, two guys could have the same exact swing and power and bat speed and everything, but obviously the guy who has a better approach and has more experience getting at bats, I mean, it'll be a night and day difference in how he as a hitter.
What were some of the things you tried to hone in on in your preparation? Right, like I kind of alluded to it at the beginning. Like, you were really diligent with the work you did, and I wouldn't say for you it was a volume thing. Like, I don't think you hit
Agreed.
an extraordinary amount. Like, you weren't the guy who came in and took 500 swings before practice.
Right.
But when you hit, it was very purposeful. Like, you would come in sometimes and we would hit, and you would hit for 10 minutes and be like, I got what I needed. Like, I feel good where I am right now. We would move on.
Mm-hmm.
How did you build that routine? And like, what were some of the things that you tried to focus in on that you need to make sure that, like, I had this in order to feel good about getting into the game?
It's funny you say that. I went out with a couple of my college baseball guys like a year ago, and we were hitting off the tee, and they're like going through it, and I take my swing and I step out and I adjust my batting gloves and I take 15 seconds and then I get back in. These guys are just getting in the way and hammering a ton of swings. Yeah, so like I said, and like I became a really big nerd at hitting, and so I would look at all these different things. And so for me, and this is kind of carried over to a lot of different areas, strength conditioning and different areas of the game. I've always been a huge quality over quantity guy. And again, as cliche as that sounds, especially in a game like baseball, when you have feel and you have all these different moving parts, I wanted to make sure that my mechanics were locked in, that fatigue didn't play a factor. And then at that point, it was something for me where I was like, I'm ready to go. And it's I'm talking about it, I'm thinking, maybe people frame it different ways. But for me, yeah, like you said, it was just a matter of getting in a place where I feel good, where I know I was doing the things that I'm able to do well, trusting it. And then I think one of the worst things that I could do is go out and try to hyperanalyze every little thing I was doing wrong, and then trying to fix it. Maybe that works for some guys. But yeah, for me, I've always been a big quality over quantity guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because they're like the one thing. And I'll talk about two kids that I coached here in a second, but I think the one thing that you just said that we could probably spend an entire podcast and the rest of this interview talking about, and I don't want to talk about it, but is the word feel. And I think that is, to coaches and to kids, like I think it can mean a laundry list of different things, but feel to each and every individual kid is going to be different, right? So like what you feel as though you need in order to get ready is what you need, and that feel also then carries into, okay, like I don't need 8,000 swings to get ready because my swing feels locked in, and this, like, when I'm going well, this is what it feels like. And I think that like so many kids are drilled into more or less kind of being robots a little bit with hitting styles and such nowadays, that like there's no variability in their swing, and they don't know how it feels. Like the regurgitation of whoever it is that's teaching them is generally going to come out. When I can't tell how many times, like, especially with younger kids, like I'd be throwing BP and I'd be like, hey, what'd you feel there? And it's like, I came out and around. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like, you've heard me say it, but what does that mean? And I think there's to your point, like being able to be a student of the game and understanding what makes your swing works the best is generally when I think a lot of guys really start figuring out what type of player they can be and really start to be able to get to the potential that they are, and maybe even exceed it. Because when I was at Siena, I had two kids, both played pro ball. And Dan Palini was one of them. He hit 52 bolts, I think, in 3 years. I mean, he's exactly like you from what you were talking about. Like, one time in 2 years, did he ever call me and be like, hey, can I hit before we go out on the field today? Like, he would take, like, but he got the most out of BP than anyone I've ever seen. because it was just his swing was dialed in. And if it didn't feel good for a round, he'd be like, hey, can I get one more? Like, sure. And he'd swing and be like, okay, I know what I have to do. And then his next round would be dialed in. And, conversely, I had another kid, Kevin Caranto, they played together. And Kevin played in the Phillies organization, but he was a kid who he needed to take what seemed like 1,500 swings every day to feel good. And it wasn't, I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but like Kevin needed that for himself to be able to get to the point he needed to be at. And that was just his process. And Danny's was completely different. It was like that. I need 30 swings on the day and I'll feel ready to go. And I mean, Kevin ended up as the all-time hits leader at Siena. It may have been broken recently. I don't know. But when he left, he led Siena in hits and played pro ball. Danny, was a little bit behind him in the hits, but, he got drafted in the 9th round and made it to AAA. I mean, but my point is, like, they're both phenomenal players who understood how their swing set up, understood the feel, and they just went about it different ways to find the success that they needed to. And I think that's important for really anybody that's listening to kind of like parse out like what you're talking about is like, this is what made me tick. I knew that. So like but it took you, it's not something that I'm assuming that it's not something that you were naturally born with. It was something that you worked through. Like when you talk about being a student of the game and watching baseball and understanding how guys are being pitched in front of me or in similar spots and how our pitchers attack, are like you were paying attention to that stuff and then using it to what it is that you need to do as a player. And I think that that's something that kind of gets lost in this game. And I think that that's an important thing to kind of, mention and highlight, just that like everyone's approach, setup, whatever is going to be different, but like you have to find what works for you, because coaches can talk to their blue in the face about what they think can happen, but they're there to be a sounding board to like throw stuff at the wall and see what fits. And hey, if that works, that works. But I think that's an important thing that you touched on, and I think that's awesome. That like I didn't need a whole hell of a lot. Like once I felt good, I was good. Like my mechanics were dialed in. Like let's go. But like some people might need more. Some people need what you need. And I think that's important as a player to, when you start gaining that confidence and know that like, hey, if you don't want to go take 50 swings before the game, don't. That's fine. Like take 25 and be ready to rock and roll. That's all.
It's like we say, it's interesting because I'm kind of in the strength conditioning world now, but it's just about what I always reiterate now. And I guess then in baseball, it's just accumulating quality reps and ideally accumulating a lot more quality reps than bad ones. And in my case, and I would think in most people's cases, obviously feel is different. The more, I guess you could say, fatigued I got and less locked in I got, the sloppier things got. And at that point, I think it just becomes a net negative.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that a lot of kids, they gravitate towards, if I just hit a lot. And yeah, if you hit a lot, like you're probably going to get better. But to your point, maybe you need to take some rest in between swings. Maybe it needs to be more swings over a longer period of time so you don't get that fatigue factor set in. But starting to analyze, like, how am I actually going about my business? Not just focusing on, well, I took 1,000 swings today, or I took 150 swings today. All right, well, that's great. But if only 50 of those things are quality and the other 100 actually were swings that were patterning bad mechanics or bad approach, to your point, it's kind of a net negative. Like you may not have actually gotten better that day. And I think a lot of high school kids and college kids, anybody who's listening to this, that just be cognizant of what you do and be thoughtful about how you go about it. Because to your point, if you can go take 25 or 30 really good swings and you feel good that day, taking that 50th and that 60th swing might not be the most productive thing. You may just need to step away from it and say, hey, I'm good to go.
It's like finding that good enough, especially before a game.
Yeah, definitely. Because you know as well as anybody, once you get in that game and once you get in that batter's box, like your mechanics don't matter anymore. Like you've done all the work. Now you actually need to be a hitter. And that's where your approach comes in. That's where pitch recognition comes in. That's where understanding situations and pitch mixes come into play. And that's ultimately what separates guys. I mean, there's plenty of dudes who can smash balls in BP. But can you take your swing into the game and can it play? Right. And we talk about that with like how coaches evaluate. And I think you listened to Coach Soleno's podcast, and one of the best things he said out of that is we don't play baseball on a carnival. Like, it's great if you can have a 100-mile-an-hour exit velocity off of a tee. Like, yeah, that means you can probably hit a ball pretty hard, but what do you do when, UNC Wilmington's Friday night guys throwing 85-mile-an-hour sliders in 1-0 counts? Like, how do you handle that? And that's usually the biggest separator.
Right. And I think that goes back to having a good enough approach. And like we talked about the other day, it's having a good approach, learning how to time things up, and then just trusting what you got.
You're physically, you were probably one of the more in shape, dedicated guys that I've been around, right? What are you, like 6'2"? You probably were like 210 when you were playing, like
220 close to.
Yeah, it was something that you took really seriously. And we talked about this a little bit, I think it was yesterday or Tuesday, excuse me. But how big of a factor did the weight room play in your development? And what would you say to kids who don't understand how important it is?
I would say three things. So the first is, if you're a really, really good player, like world class, you're probably going to be good no matter what you do. And I'm talking, the Manny Ramirez's of the world, who no matter what they do, they're going to be studs. And if you're really bad, number one, you're probably not listening to this podcast. But you're probably best off picking a different sport. But if you're in this middle range, and this is where I think I fell, and where a lot of guys fall, and going deep into strength and conditioning is one of the best things that you can do. Obviously, we know the importance of tools. In baseball, you could talk about like exit velocity, speed, and all that. And you've told me you have more experience than I do, and I'm sure you do too, Keith, that that's a huge separator between high school and college guys. And I saw that, obviously. And I was fortunate to get in front of some pretty smart people early on who kind of enforced that in my head. And so if anyone listening is out there is kind of on that fringe and you're not giving much or any attention to that, I would say first thing is get on that ASAP. If I had to dive a little bit deeper into the weeds, number one, if you're not doing something, like I said, do it ASAP. Obviously anything is better than nothing. Number two is, if you have the means, try to seek out help from somebody. It's obviously a lot better if we have a coach looking at us. I mean, there's every single professional team has a strength conditioning coach and athletic trainers and physical therapists who work with them. And then the other thing that I think was a pretty big difference maker for me was, I know as baseball guys, we have a tendency, at least we did, to become huge meatheads, right? We just want to lift and we want to squat and we want to bench and just get enormous. One of the things that was a game changer for me, and I've seen anecdotally with a lot of our guys, and if a kid's listening out this who's just going to the gym and smashing weights, it's great, is doing stuff where you're moving fast. I'm talking sprinting, medicine ball throws, jumps, pretty much anything where you're moving fast. And I'm not sure if you see this often, but that's probably the thing that I see missed out on the most. And that's something that is, again, I've seen and is a huge separator between guys who are throwing hard and not, who are hitting balls 110 miles an hour versus 90. And then just like for overall athleticism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that we talked about the other day is like people swing different, right? Like your swing was very different than Michael Katz's. Like Michael was a steeper, wasn't in the zone a ton of time. Like he was a steeper swing. You were a little bit longer, in the zone a lot longer. But the commonality between you two is you're both freaking really strong. And I think that you can make up for flaws in your physical game if you're really physically strong. And I think that gets lost in the sauce sometimes, because there's a reason that those guys on television look the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, I get it. They're professionals. I understand that. they've had a lot more time in the weight room, but that didn't start when they were 25, right? And the guys who have success, and if you turn on television now and you go watch LSU or Wake Forest, like you're talking the tippy top of college baseball right now, it's not a coincidence that those dudes are big and they are strong and they move well. And it's because they're in the weight room. It's because they're doing a lot of the things that you're talking about. They're moving fast. They're moving weight. They're really focusing on their bodies. And for the 17-year-old and 18-year-old, a lot of times the biggest difference between a guy being a Division I scholarship guy and or not being a Division I scholarship guy, like a lot of the times it's just your physicality. It's not necessarily your ability to play the game. And that's why you see guys catch up to guys later on. The 17-year-old who doesn't get an offer out of high school ends up being a draft pick. He probably just took a little bit longer to either figure that out or physically mature. But if you're a high school kid and you're not getting after it right now in the weight room, specifically, like we're recording this on January 11th, you got to, because if you want to compete, you need to be physical. Like you need
one of the things
fast, and you need to be strong.
Yeah, so one of the things I hear the most often from our guys is that they wish they would have started earlier. And so if you're listening to this and you're not doing anything currently or you're not taking it seriously, like I said, I know I come from a place where I do this, but I think it's one of the best things you could ever do.
I think the other piece to it too, and Andy and I come from an era where, the weight room wasn't huge. Right, like it was the old school. Like you're going to get huge and you can't throw, and your arm action's going to be bad. And we kind of went through. We kind of played in that era of college baseball where it started, like that mindset started to shift a little bit into kind of where we are now, where the weight room is super important. And I think the other piece to it too, I was big in the weight room, especially sophomore year on, and I was a catcher, so I played around 215, and I think the one thing that the weight room, aside from the physical stuff from a baseball standpoint, like like the injury prevention side of it. Like my freshman year, I was in the weight room before I got to school, but not nearly as much as I should have been, and I had some arm issues, and blah, 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 blah. Like once I get in the weight room and was in there full time, like I never had any issues realistically that were like, aside from the, dings and everything you get being a catcher and playing a lot of games. But from like an overall standpoint, like that more or less went away. And I think the other thing too is like, at the college level, and we all know this because we coached it and played it, and you did it, Charlie, like you play so many games and not like add in the studying, the going to class, the practice, the travel, everything. It is like your body, if you're not in really, really good shape, like you're going to lose a lot of that over the course of the season if you're not continuing to keep up on it in the weight room like a lot of people do now. But like if you're not there, if I wasn't at 215 before we started, like I'd finish the season at like 205. Like I would lose 10 pounds, and I was lifting during the season and doing stuff, but like you're gonna lose just with everything that goes on. It's gonna happen, 100%. And you like it delays your body being able to be broken down over a college season, so that when you get to the end of the year and you're in the conference tournament or regional, whatever it is, like you're still feeling really good body wise. Like yes, it's long. No one, like it's always the joke. Like no one actually ever feels good. Like your arm actually feels good in game 62. You're like, something's wrong with you, bro. Like your arm shouldn't feel that good. But like the point is, when the reality is like you do all of this stuff in the fall and in the winter, and then maintain through the year so that you can actually play the entire season. Like how many guys I've seen, and we've all seen it, like when you played and then when you coached, like you can see those guys that aren't necessarily where they need to be at the start. Like they start to taper off very quickly after the midpoint of the season. And the guys that are where they need to be, like they can maintain that level of play the entire season. And I think that's a huge piece. Like, I'm not trying to. I agree 100% with you. I just think from a coaching standpoint, those are the two things that I always loved about it too, because it's like, guys, this is long. Like you've never gone through this. You need to be in the best shape you can, because you're going to diminish at the end of the year if you are not where you need to be now. And I think that that's also something that like I don't think you feel it in in high school baseball because the season's so short and the summer it's so spread out, but I mean, shoot, you got Mondays off, you're practicing on Tuesday, maybe a midweek game, you're playing midweek Wednesday, you might be traveling Thursday, you're playing Friday, Saturday, so like that's long, man. Like you have to be in good shape to be able to maintain what it is that you can do over the course of those, 15, 16, 17, 18 weeks.
I generally refer to it as a physical buffer, meaning the better shape you're in, generally the more you're going to be able to handle, right? If you
I like that
13 inning game, or if you end up throwing more pitches than you did, or play a doubleheader on a certain game and you got to catch 18 innings, the better shape you're in, the better you'll be able to handle pretty much anything like you said, of course, there are going to be times when you don't feel good.
Well, and I think that's important too, right? Like what you just all of a sudden you have a doubleheader. Like we're one of the only sports that is weather dependent. Like you might get washed on Friday night and you're playing doubleheader on Saturday. Like if you're not in good shape and you're 2 weeks away from the conference tournament, like you're going to break down the back half of game 2 and you might not be catching game 3 or playing in the field, whatever it might be. And I think that those things are important because you're like the season from a baseball standpoint, yes, it's long and grueling and everything we've talked about, but like it's fluid. It's not like football where it's like, yo, we're playing on Saturday. Like, and we got rain coming. Like we might play Friday. We might push to Saturday. We might be playing Saturday, Monday. Like you don't know, and I think that like being able to be fluid in what it is that you do from a strength and conditioning standpoint is just as important as being able to, handle it from a skill set standpoint too, because you want to make sure that you're at the best physical shape that you can possibly be at every single point in the season. Because no matter who you are, it's going to diminish at some point in time. But that's also why, to Andy's point, like that's why the big leaguers look the way they do. Like they're playing 162 games. They're flying all over the country. Like they know their bodies are going to break down eventually. And I think that that's where, there's a lot of emphasis put on it now that, guys aren't breaking down, at the rate in which I think they probably did years ago.
Mm-hmm. We get into some more specific strength stuff because I definitely want you to talk about some of the stuff that you do with your guys. But I'd love to hear maybe a couple tips that you would give high school kids who are going through the recruiting process, because obviously you went through it, and then a couple tips for them when they get on campus, right? Like you've lived this, like you've been through all portions of this. Not only did you play college baseball, but you ended up going on to play professionally with the A's. Like if you were going to give a couple tips to kids for the immediate future of your recruiting process and then the future of them being on campus, like what kind of wisdom would you like to impart to the people listening?
Focus on and invest in yourself first. That's the biggest thing that I would say. Whether that's deciding which travel ball team you want to play for when you're 15 years old, whether that's deciding if you want to invest in training with a strength conditioning coach. I think the best thing that you can do is stop worrying about what other people are doing, what showcases are going on at first, what you're missing out on, who you're not being seen by. The best thing you can do is just get better. And it's easy to get caught up in all the other noise, but whatever you can do to improve yourself, like good things will happen. I saw that in my career, and I know a lot of my guys have seen similar results. Just focus on getting better, trying to show off what you can do first and foremost, and then the rest will likely take care of itself. The worst thing you can do, and I would think that you guys agree with this, is go out to a showcase when you're 15 years old and you're throwing 71 miles per hour and showcasing nothing. A significantly better investment would be to use that towards lessons, skill work, strength training, whatever it is. So by far, that's the biggest thing that I would say is focus on yourself first, do whatever you can to get better. The second thing I would say would be to put yourself around other people and coaches who are going to help you do that. I am biased, but I would say guys like you, who can help guide you through the process and who have been there and who have done that is massively invaluable. And then as far as moving forward, I think one of the things that you can do when you go into college, and one of the things that I sort of learned the hard way, but also came in with that served me well in a way, was going in there with the white belt mentality. Have you heard about that? Pretty much the white belt mentality is, as far as I understand it, is just going in like you're a complete novice. Going in saying, I'm going to listen to whatever the coaches say. I'm going to hear it out. I'm going to listen to whatever feedback I have. And I'm not going to come in with my head held high thinking I know this and I'm good at this and whatever. And again, that's another one that sounds cliche. But you see pretty fast that the guys who come in and they're kind of stuck in their ways or think they're, Mr. All-American coming out of high school, generally they get humbled pretty quick. And what I saw is the coaches, as soon as you step up on campus, they know, if you're wanting to listen to what they say, they know if you're bought in. The older guys will catch up on that. Those are the big things that come to mind off the top of my head. And of course, if you expand it on it, I'm thinking think of similar things. But yeah, investing in yourself and having that white belt mentality are the big things that I think serve me well.
Love it. Yeah, the white belt thing's interesting because you're right. Like guys who come in and think they got it all figured out, it usually hits them pretty quick that they don't. And you just don't have a lot of time to recover in a career when every single year they're bringing in guys to replace you. So if you're not willing to listen, if you're not willing to buy into a philosophy, if you're not willing to assimilate yourself into the team, and that doesn't mean that you get your uniqueness or your individuality taken away from you. But if there's a team culture that's established and you're going to fight it, it's going to be tough for you. If you don't want to be coachable, if you don't want to be told that you need to do something different, it's going to hit you pretty hard. And I hadn't heard of it specifically termed as white belt, but I like that because it's really true. Like if you just come in with an open mind and you're there to help the team win and you're going to do whatever it takes to help them win, and you don't have any preconceived notions about what you are or who you are and any assumptions on what your role is going to be, like it usually turns out good for those guys. And I know, Keith, you've witnessed it and over 10 years, the guys who came in and just put their heads down and were really good teammates and showed up every day. Those guys, they tend to find themselves on the field, and they tend to find themselves in the lineup frequently just because they're willing to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it works conversely to being loud and boisterous about stuff, especially when you're new into a program, whether or not you're a freshman or a transfer or whatever. Because the reality is that if there's a pretty decent culture in that program, and this is true, and it might sound harsh when I say this, but no one really cares what you've done before you've gotten there.
It's true.
It's way more of what are you going to do for us and how are you going to help us win, and are you going to be able to, seamlessly fit in, and so it's going to take a little while, especially for freshmen, but I think that's something that gets lost a little bit. And I think it's hard sometimes when you're a young kid, like you're trying to fit in and you're talking about yourself, and kind of the reality. The older guys are like, yeah, I don't care. Like, I don't care what you did in high school. Like, I care what you're going to do here. And like you said, Andy, I think as a coach watching it, like, as a player, it's easy to say, like, we had that conversation 1,000 times when I was a player, every freshman class that came in, like, dude, no one cares, but I think as a coach, you see it sometimes as a little bit of false confidence. Kids trying to feel as though they're not, like, they don't think they fit in. So they're trying to like overcompensate for it. And I think, eventually a lot of that stuff usually ends up taking care of itself. But I think you're far better served as a freshman walking into a program and literally going about your business the way that you do. And like you said, Charlie, like you had a great group of older guys at William and Mary when you got there. Like when you have that and when you watch what they do and you start kind of doing the same thing, like all of a sudden things start to click a lot faster and you find yourself in the lineup a lot sooner. I think that some kids try to fight that for whatever reason, or like they don't necessarily know or haven't figured that out yet. And I think that's where you can really find yourself fighting for burn as a younger player is when you can kind of look at what the older guys are doing, like, and start to not necessarily fall in line, but do the things that it is that they do, because those are the little things that we talk about, right? And it's kind of hard to always define what the little things are, but those are the little things. It's how you go about your pre-prep work for ground balls. It's, you know, how you go about your throwing program. It's all of those things. And if you start paying attention to what the older guys do that do it the right way and have success, and you start trying to, you know, emulate it, copy it, whatever, however you want to frame it, like, those kids generally start to have a lot more success early on in their careers because they start to figure it out a lot sooner. Like, you know, I distinctly remember my freshman year, like, I don't even know what it was. It was something about signs. And I remember Andy standing on shortstop and just screaming, "Figure it out." And I was like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be figuring out back here. Like, what? I don't know. It had to do with signs, because I grew up in an era where, like, it was second sign on second. All of a sudden, like, we're using complicated sign systems. I didn't know what I was doing. And, you know, half the time our pitchers didn't know either. So, you know, but Andy's out there just lambasting me at shortstop, like, "Figure it out." And I'm like, bro, I don't know what I'm figuring out here. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing. My head is spinning back here. Like, okay, figure it out. I guess that's the best advice our captain can give me. Okay, here we go. Moving on. But I'm just joking, man. I love you. But that's a true story. But, you know, I think part of it was, like, you know, my freshman year, we only had 2 catchers. So, like, I had to figure it out very quickly. And it was, you know, we were really good. We had a really good group of older guys. Like, it was a lot easier to start to figure things out when you just kind of took a step back and was like, okay, like, how do I slow this game down for myself? And how do I take in all of this information and try to digest it and make it work? And, you know, before you know it, like, you know, I had played a decent amount my freshman year, and then I started my sophomore, junior, and senior year, and I ended up as a captain. And, you know, it wasn't necessarily for, you know, I think it was, for me, it was a lot more of being able to really surround myself with really good people on our team. We had a lot of really good guys on our team, but, like, to surround myself with people who had success and figure out, like, okay, this is what I should be doing in order to do that. And I think when you're a younger player going into a program doing that, like, you want to find those guys that have success, because every team has them, and every team has 5 or 6 guys that haven't had success, and you want to stay away from them because they're going to try to drag you down into their little world of ancestral thinking of why they don't play. And that's true of every team. So, you want to find the guys that have success and play and emulate what they do. And you're going to be far better served in your career for it, because you have such a finite window to be able to do it.
Yeah, and like you said, it really does end up working itself out. You know, it kind of sounds like one of those abstract things, but it really always does. And one of the things that I think you can take this in a good or a bad way depending on your mindset. But one of the things that I went in with was that it was a clean slate. You know, nobody cares about what you did before, and nobody knows what you're going to do now. And so it's one of those things where, you know, in college, in high school, you hear the complaints sometimes, "Oh, coach isn't playing me for, you know, it's politics," or whatever it is. In college, that's probably not going to happen, you know, because that coach's job is pretty much dependent on the team's success. And so it's pretty much you play, you perform, you prove that you're coachable, then good things are going to happen.
I've said this on here before, and I'm glad you said it, but I've said it like, I mean, I was a head coach. Like, I never wrote a lineup and left a kid out of the lineup. And I was fortunate. I didn't dislike anyone that ever played for me, but, like, I never wrote a lineup where I was like, I'm mad at him, I'm not putting him in the lineup, I don't like him. Like, that doesn't happen in college. Like, you know, and I'm glad you said that, because you're right. It's those guys' jobs are on the line. Like, if they don't like you, but you can help them win, like, you're likely going to find yourself in the lineup.
It was like the coach that you were thinking of my freshman year. He used to say that even if you're killing guys, as long as you're hitting enough jacks, you're going to be in the lineup.
I believe
it. Oh, that's too good. That's too good. All right. On that note, I want to transition to some of the strength and conditioning stuff. Talk a little bit about what you do and what you focus on with your guys. Like, I know, like, you come from a sport background, obviously, and I know you take that into what you do with your guys. And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but for the high school kid right now, what are some of the things that you try to instill into your athletes, and what are the things that you try to focus on as you develop them from a physical perspective?
So, like I said, I don't want to go too deep into the weeds because I want to keep it practical and help people out. And so if I look at the most, I would say, common mistakes that I see, one of the big ones would be, well, the first is not doing anything, right? Of course. But one of the big ones, if you are doing something, is focusing primarily on or only on the heavy lifting stuff, or doing the bodybuilding splits, the back and biceps, the chest and triceps. Like, that stuff is not bad, but as we've talked about, the biggest separator is going to be power, speed, bat speed, exit velocity, throwing velocity, all that type of stuff. And one of the lowest hanging fruits that we've seen a lot of success with is, and this sounds kind of basic, is doing things that are fast and powerful. So sprints are a massive part of our program that have carryover to just about everything else. Second is like any form of jumping, whether that's, your classic box jumps, or if anyone's familiar with bounds and broad jumps and things like that. And then different forms of, medicine ball throws. The other big thing I would think of is thinking outside of just the big compound lifts. I think you guys are in a similar era to where I was. I know I was a little bit later than you, where we were just huge and using the barbell and squatting and benching and deadlifting, and that's all great. But I think one thing that's really important is doing more quote unquote functional stuff. So the stuff where you're getting really strong on one leg, and the stuff where you're moving through a large range of motion. So if anyone listening to this is familiar with stuff like split squats or, full range of motion rows, the stuff that we typically think of as accessory exercises, I think is something that's massively undervalued. And I've been able to develop some relationships with some of these strength and conditioning coaches at bigger, SEC schools. And it's the same idea. I would say it's moving away from the meathead approach, which obviously, there's a time and place for that. And we all love smashing our heavy weights, and moving towards a more holistic approach that includes a lot of different things, lifting heavy, moving fast, doing things to increase your range of motion, doing specific arm care work, on top of a good throwing program, and then trying to blend it all together in a way that you can adhere to and recover from.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I feel like there's a little bit of a misconception out there that if you're not constantly just pushing big weight, that you can't get bigger, right? And size matters, and that comes a lot of time. And correct me if I'm wrong. Like, this is very much your area of expertise, but size comes from nutrition, and it comes with just maturation, right? Like, like a 25-year-old is just going to be inherently bigger if they've been lifting for 3 or 4 years. But correct me if I'm wrong. The big thing is, are you getting stronger and are you getting more explosive? And then it's less about how much mass you're putting on and more about, are you becoming a better athlete? Are you able to perform at your sport in a better way? But there's also a misconception that you can't add mass while training the way that you described.
Right. And it's like you said, if you look at all the big leaguers nowadays, I mean, some of the guys look like superheroes, number one, I absolutely agree that if you're doing some form of strength training, you don't need to go crazy with the bodybuilding stuff. Nutrition is what's going to add weight. If you're eating well and working out to some degree, you're going to add good mass. And like you said, Keith, earlier, there was the old misconception that if you lift weights, you'll get super tight and muscle bound and won't be able to move. It's probably not going to happen, especially if you're doing, a well-rounded strength training program like I talked about. You're rarely going to get tight or muscle bound. I joke that, if that was the case, then Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and all them would have been bad baseball players. Why do people take steroids? It's because they get bigger and stronger and they improve. Yeah, and chances are, I mean, you even look at some of these guys who I would say have, old 1980s programs. And again, I wouldn't recommend those, and I think you need to be smart. But just in general, I would say the positives of getting stronger and more powerful are enormous. And the guys who are doing that, they're not becoming super, tight and muscle bound and having their velocity affected whatsoever.
No, I think it's a huge thing, especially nowadays. Like was it my junior year? Going into my junior year, I started working out with a strength and conditioning guy he was our trainer when I was in high school. And he ended up opening his own strength and conditioning place, blah, blah, blah. Ron Anus, awesome guy. But he was he was kind of one of the first guys, at least that I know of in the area where I came from, that really started doing I guess and I don't know, correct me, I could butcher this, but it was more like functional strength
Right.
/ explosive strength training stuff. Like I was doing push up or handstand push ups, a lot of stuff that I was what am I doing here? This is wild. And then, but the gains I saw were absurd. And when we came back and we got into our strength training program in school and stuff, my numbers were absurd from what they were the year before. And I worked out with it again my senior year, and my numbers went up again, and it was really good. But that's when I was okay, there's a lot more to this than just bench press, squat, deadlift, clean, whatever. And I found my overall health was a lot better from a body standpoint, but also I held up a lot better. And I thought that that was a huge success for me personally moving forward. And like I said, it was one of the first, he was the first guy, we were doing stuff. I can't even remember half the stuff we were doing. I distinctly remember he was handstand push-ups. And I was excuse me? And he was up against the wall. And I was okay. And it was it was incredibly tough, but then all of a sudden, you go back to actual barbell bench, and I'm this is a lot easier than it ever was. And it was we did the band dumbbell bench press, which no one had ever seen before. And I brought it back and did it my senior year. People were what is this? I'm I don't know. My man had me doing it. I feel great. My numbers went up. I'm all in on this. But I think that being able to embrace that type of stuff, especially as a baseball player, and be one, it's you're not going to get super big and stiff. And you're right. If the steroids did it, those guys would suck. They don't. There's a reason that people did it. Still probably do. But the reality is you can put yourself in a far better position, not only once you get to college, but in the recruiting process of looking the part. And I think that that's a huge piece that I think some people miss when we start talking to families about the recruiting process. You want to look the part. And if you're in the weight room and you're taking care of your body, and look, you're 17 years old, you're not going to look like a 22-year-old in college unless you're just freakishly genetically gifted. But you can look better than most 17-year-olds out there, and that is that's going to set you apart from everyone else who's being recruited. And I think that that's where being able to invest in the strength and conditioning component and getting with somebody like you, that can help you get to the goals it is that you want to reach, because it's a huge piece, especially when you get to college, right? I can't when I was a head coach, there were guys they would keep some of our freshmen off to the side who couldn't do half the lifts because they didn't know what they were doing. Just having basic knowledge of what you're going to have to do when you get to college is huge, because if you have an idea and you know what you're doing, you can jump right in and you're going to be further ahead than maybe half the freshman class, which now puts you further ahead in the fall. It puts you further ahead in the spring. You want to continually, and I think when you get to college, Hobbs talks about this, and I'm sorry, I'm on a soliloquy here, but Hobbs talked about this, when you get to college, and regardless of where it is, the margins of error are razor thin, and you want to give yourself as much of an edge as you possibly can. And I think the strength and conditioning component, specifically in the baseball world, is where a lot of guys can really start to give themselves an edge, not only in the recruiting process, but once you get to campus and further on, because you can really start to see a lot of gains in your game from being able to be strong and fast and powerful and explosive and everything, because everything translates. So I think that that's something that kind of gets missed, and I'm glad we had you on tonight. But I think, especially if you're a younger kid or parent listening to this, you want to invest in this part. And to your point earlier, and this is my last point, when you invest in yourself, like instead of going to that 4 showcases that you don't need to go to, like take that money and go get a strength and conditioning guy to get you bigger, faster, and stronger. Because then you can invest that money the following year in a showcase, and I can guarantee you're going to be in a better spot and likely more recruitable than you are right now, having not done any of it. Sorry, I got on the soapbox.
It's a good soapbox.
That was great.
You hit on the mobility piece. Do you try to capture that? Because there's a health factor to this too. And like we had alluded to this, and Coach Leno talked about it at Wake Forest, that part of the strength and conditioning piece isn't just about getting strong, it's about staying healthy. And that strength and mobility equals health and all that good stuff. Do you have any way to incorporate mobility outside of those lifts, or do you try to kind of build the mobility factor into the strength portion, or is it a little bit of both? Like, do you have mobility days? Is there like some sort of a dynamic routine that you find effective for guys that gets them ready to lift, or how do you tackle that?
Good question. So yes, I 100% agree that number one priority for us, it's not a sexy thing. We say the number one priority of training is to, number one, not get hurt, or at least try to minimize injury risk. And then everything else is secondary. You know, it's like what you touched on earlier, Keith. As far as mobility goes, I would say in order of importance from my experience and from what I've gathered, the most important thing that you can do is, the simple way of putting it is, if you don't use it, you lose it, you know, is to actually push yourself into deeper ranges of motion, especially in your training. So, you know, I could, if you guys want to see examples of this, I have plenty that I post on social media, but exercises where you're putting yourself into a deeper range of motion under control and pushing yourself through as much as you comfortably can is going to be the lowest hanging fruit. That's when like structural adaptations will take place. The second thing is, outside of lifting, whether it's a warm up, a cool down, or on your off days, doing some type of mobility work, again, where you're moving yourself, moving your body through space, not just stretching. You know, stretching, it has its place, but it's not going to do much to improve your actual range of motion capabilities as it relates to throwing and swinging and running. There's different things where you're just moving your body through space, you know, reaching end ranges with your shoulders and your hips and your ankles are going to be number two. If you nail deep range of motion lifting and then separate mobility work that's lower in intensity, you probably won't need anything else.
When you get a new guy in, just call like just a high school athlete, what are usually the biggest deficiencies that you have to address right away?
Despite what I just said, the lowest hanging fruit, or despite what I said earlier, the lowest hanging fruit for most guys that I see, probably 90% of the guys I could see, is get stronger and gain weight. Generally speaking, unless you're already coming in and you're pretty sloppy, there's a good chance that you need to gain a lot of weight. And I'm talking good weight, you know, and if you're new to strength training, you know, haven't been doing it for more than 2 to 3 years, there's probably a lot of low-hanging muscle mass that you can put on that's going to have no negative effect and all benefit. So number one is get stronger, and like you said, eat enough to gain weight. That's number one. Number two, and this is a little bit more direct, I guess, what I think one of the biggest things that I missed out on, and one of the biggest things that I think baseball players, no matter their position, miss out on is actually the value in sprinting. If you are not out there, sprinting is like one of the most powerful things, or the most powerful thing that you can do. And even if you don't care about your speed, which you should, simply doing it in and of itself makes a ton of good things happen. Like we've seen it, guys will massively increase their bat speed. We've seen swimmers swim faster laps and golfers hit longer drives. Again, like you could go deep into like the power of the nervous system and all these different things that take place. But if I had to tell people like one specific training thing that they should be doing that they're probably not, it's max effort sprinting.
So what you're saying is you're not a fan of running the mile as a preseason test?
So Keith, I all 4 years of college, we had to run the miles of conditioning tests. And I was told behind the scenes that it actually didn't matter that much. But I probably ended up running it a total of about 40 times. And I came last every single time. There was, I think my freshman year, if you didn't pass the mile, you had to come back the next morning. And then the only way you could pass, or that you didn't have to come back the next morning, was if you won. And I think I went 13 days in a row running the mile at 6 a.m. The last day was all by myself.
No, you won.
I won.
Hey.
I get coaches. I get why coaches do what they do, but that was something that I couldn't get behind that one.
My favorite mile story was Owen Soccer coming around. You were running on the track, so it's 4 laps to a mile. So he's on his 4th lap, and he's coming around the 3rd turn. And he, if I remember this correctly, which I'm pretty sure that I am, he puked while running, never even stopped, and got the time to do it. And that's when we knew we're like, Owen's going to be okay. Like that kid was so tough. But yeah, that was my favorite mile story by far. Well, the other part that you don't mention in this, Charlie, is that every time that you didn't pass it was another day that I had to get up.
That's right.
You at the track at 6 o'clock. So there's a slight angle of revenge there. They're like, you're going to make me run the mile? Well, you're getting up 10 days. You're getting up 10 days in a row at 5:40.
I'll tell you what, though. I'll swear I buy this. I was trying my best. It was just, that's not what I'm cut out for.
I mean, after the 3rd day, if the whole win thing wasn't in place, like after the 3rd day, I'd be like, they all passed. Like, just seen them this morning. They were, I don't know what they did. They were on fire this morning.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing, Coach K. So my freshman year, so before you were there, we had conditioning sessions. And one of the things that we had on one of the days was everybody lined up behind home plate, and we ran laps around the field. And so the first time around, it was everybody, the first half the guys who were in front were done. And then after that, you kept going. And if you were one of the first 2 guys, then you were done. And so, of course, I was in the back of the pack. And this goes back to getting humbled your freshman year and kind of learning your place. It was me and a few other guys left. And so I got into a pretty heated sprint trying to give my all so I could be done. And of course, I fell behind. And so I was last, and I had one final lap. And I started throwing up, and I'm still going. It's just me. And I'm throwing up, and I'm going around center field, and I'm just in front of the fence. And I turn my head, and I look in towards home plate, and the whole team is there doing planks. And they're waiting for me to finish. About 2 minutes later, I get home to home plate, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, guys. Got throw up in my shirt. You know, everybody's pissed off because I just made them hold a 3-minute plank.
Right. It happens. It happens.
Circling the wagons. That was the worst thing in the world.
We had a couple bad punishment runs as players, Charlie.
Here's the thing. I never hated it. What I hated was guys like Eric, Tom Close, Jacob Wiley. I hope you're all listening to this, because they could run for days, and you're just like struggling when you get like, you're like an hour and 10 minutes in, you're struggling, and they're just like cruising by. Like, oh yeah, this isn't hard. Like there's times I'm like, they're going to run by me again, and I'm going to elbow them right in the stomach so they double over. We might have to run farther and longer. I don't care. Screw these guys. I was so mad. God, I hated that.
The best punishment story that, and I'll leave the details of why we were running out, but we had one guy got in trouble. So it's like, you pay for the sins of your peers, right? And we ran laps around the gym. I couldn't tell you how long. 45 minutes, maybe. I don't know, just continuous running. And periodically our coach would pick a guy out to go fill up a cup of water and bring it to the guy who was got in trouble, sat in the middle of the gym while everybody ran. And we would have to go get him a cup of water until everybody on the team went and got him a cup of water and gave it to him.
No way.
Lesson
remember-
learned, if you're going to be the guy that screws up, just know that you're screwing your teammates.
We had my freshman year, we did 9 innings. And long story short, but you baseline, half court, baseline, full court, and back was 1 out. So you'd get 3 outs, and then it was on and off the field, which is down and back. Had to do it under a certain amount of time. And I distinctly remember this because they started around like the 7th when everyone is just dead. Like calling out all the freshmen for like not getting it under time, and everybody just absolutely berating whoever that freshman was. And I remember like I finished second on one of them, and they were like, Glasser didn't get under the time, and everyone like turned. And I was like, I finished second. And I just got berated, and I was like, I'm just going to shut my mouth and just wear this one. It was like, back on the line. I was like, this is the worst thing in the world for what is currently happening right now. I don't even know why. You never really know why. It's just one of those things. Like all of a sudden, it's like, all right, here we go. And you know, like you show up and you know, you're like, this isn't going to be good.
Coach,
Everyone's in a bad mood.
Gas that day.
Whew.
But
That doesn't
All right, Charley.
happen anymore for everyone listening. Just so you know, that's not something that generally happens all that much anymore. So
yeah,
this
you're
is just
lucky.
war
You missed
stories
out-
from
you missed out on
20
that
years
era
ago.
of college baseball. But Charley, man, any parting words? Anything else you want to add?
To double down on, I guess, my main message, and this is one that's going to, again, sound cliche. If I had to distill, I guess, what I've gathered in my own career and in working with a lot of college baseball guys since, it would be, above all else, just focus on constantly trying to improve yourself, your game, your mental ability, your skill set, your physicality, all of the above. If you can do that and block out the noise, a lot of good things will happen.
Those are good words to end on. Really appreciate you coming on. Follow Charley on Instagram. What is it? At Charley Gould with a Y for those of you.
Right?
Charley Gould SCC on Instagram. There's a boatload of great content on there. If you're looking to improve yourself physically, like he's a must follow. And I know you got the Apex training team, which is something that if you're looking for some remote programming, if you're looking for a way to get stronger, like reach out to Charley on Instagram. He's one of the best out there, and you'll be glad that you did. So thanks for Charley. Love you, man. Really, really excited and really happy that you came on today, and we'll talk again soon.
No, I appreciate you guys, and you guys are doing awesome work.
Thanks, Charley.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.